Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wolf Pit with another episode of What Are We Eating? Today we're diving into a battle of the spaghetti rings with meatballs heavyweights, and also with a middleweight, or maybe it's a lightweight. Which many moons ago, when I was a kid, SpaghettiOs with meatballs were a staple in my house, and one of my absolute favorite things to eat as a kid. The only SpaghettiOs that I remember eating as a kid were the original Campbell's SpaghettiOs with meatballs, which were introduced in 1965 and marketed as the world's first spoonable spaghetti that was aimed to be easier for kids to eat.
Yeah, excuse me, Larry, I don't understand. The can on that label you have says Franco-American, not Campbell's, so you're wrong.
Well, Scooter, you're right. It does appear that I'm incorrect. But fortunately for me, I'm not incorrect. SpaghettiOs were invented by Donald Gork, who was a marketing manager at the Campbell Soup Company's Franco-American division. He developed the ring-shaped pasta in 1965 as a kid-friendly, spoonable alternative to traditional spaghetti. SpaghettiOs were initially marketed under the Franco-American brand, which was acquired by Campbell's in 1915. Chef Boyardee's mini spaghetti rings and meatballs are a much more modern product, which I could not find the exact date of when they were introduced. But Chef Boyardee did have a product that was aimed towards kids called roller coasters, which were wavy pasta pieces with mini meatballs and tomato sauce, and continued to be popular through the 70s and 80s, but was eventually discontinued. I do remember eating roller coasters as a kid, but I don't remember which one I liked better, SpaghettiOs or roller coasters. So let's dive into the three brands we have to try today. Starting off with the original 15.6 ounce can of Campbell's SpaghettiOs with meatballs that consist of pasta with meatballs made with chicken and beef and added in tomato sauce that cost $1.37. And out of 789 ratings, received 4.4 stars out of 5. Here's the list of ingredients, and I'm happy to say there's no TVP. And if you've never heard of TVP, it stands for Textured Vegetable Protein, which is a soy product used as a meat filler and a meat substitute that, depending on how it's used, can make meat, or things that are supposed to be meat, taste like sponges. Or more specifically, a moist mattress in a nursing home. Or so I've heard.
Larry, you're right. It does taste like a moist mattress in a nursing home. And I know that because my name is Scooter and I know everything.
Yes, Scooter, you're right. You know everything. And I'm really proud of you that you know what a moist mattress in a nursing home tastes like. You weirdo. The whole can of SpaghettiOs with meatballs has 380 calories, 11 grams of total fat, 2.5 grams of saturated fat, no trans fat, 1.5 grams of polyunsaturated fat, 2.5 grams of monounsaturated fat, 35 milligrams of cholesterol, 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 53 grams of carbohydrates, 4 grams of fiber, 53 grams of carbohydrates, 4 grams of fiber, 14 grams of sugars, and 17 grams of protein. Now let's get our SpaghettiOs with meatballs out of the can and into a bowl, and then into the microwave to get them heated through. And I was going to keep this video nostalgic and heat up the SpaghettiOs with meatballs on the stovetop, because back in the 70s and 80s, not everyone had a microwave in their home. But my father used to work for Mackey Vending Company, and one way or another, he acquired a microwave. I'm not sure if it was gifted to him or he got a 5-finger discount, but we had one, and that was all that mattered. I was the coolest kid on the block because we made these after school. If you've ever had one of these and you know what it's called, let me know in the comments. After microwaving on high for 2.5 minutes, our Campbell's SpaghettiOs and meatballs are ready. So we scooped up a big old spoonful with a little bit of everything, and then into the old pie hole and down the gullet they went. And that right there was a bite of nostalgia. The sauce basically tastes like a sweeter version of Campbell's condensed tomato soup, which is delicious. The SpaghettiOs themselves were cooked perfectly, not mushy, not too firm, just right. But the meatballs were the most shocking thing out of the can. They were actually really good. No, of course they're not Yonona's meatballs. But for meatballs out of the can, the texture was extremely good. much better than a lot of the frozen meatballs. These are overall very good for what they are. Processed food, and they very much made me reminisce about my childhood. And I'm giving Campbell's SpaghettiOs with meatballs an 8 out of 10. Next, we have the 15-ounce can of Chef Boyardee's mini spaghetti rings and meatballs that consist of pasta and meatballs made with pork, chicken, and beef and a tomato sauce that costs $1.18. Out of 42 ratings, the Chef Boyardee mini spaghetti rings with meatballs received 4.1 stars out of 5. Here's the list of ingredients, and once again, no TVP, and kudos to Chef Boyardee for using dark meat chicken. I mean, if you gotta use chicken in meatballs, at least they use dark meat chicken. The whole can has 500 calories, 22 grams of total fat, 7 grams of saturated fat, no trans fat, 40 milligrams of cholesterol, 1,200 milligrams of sodium, 1,560 milligrams of potassium, 58 grams of carbohydrates, 6 grams of fiber, 18 grams of sugars, and 18 grams of protein. Now let's get our Chef Boyardee mini spaghetti rings and meatballs out of the can, into the bowl, and heat it up. And is it me, or does Chef Boyardee's tomato sauce look brighter than the Campbell's? 2.5 minutes later, our mini spaghetti rings and meatballs are heated through and ready to enjoy. So we got a big old spoonful of the spaghetti rings, the sauce, and the meatballs. And then into the old pie hole, and down the gullet they went. Alright, so that bite wasn't nearly as pleasant as the Campbell's SpaghettiOs meatballs. The sauce wasn't as good as the Campbell's, it didn't seem to have as much flavor, and it wasn't as sweet. It was a little on the bland side, to be honest. The pasta rings were a little bit on the mushy side. Not inedible, but just a little bit mushy. And then we saved the worst for last. The meatballs. There was something off with these meatballs that I just didn't like. I know this isn't going to make sense, but they were kind of mushy and gritty. Not gritty to the point it tasted like you were eating eggshells, but gritty to the point like it might have had some gristle in it. Quite a bit of gristle. The Chef Boyardee pasta rings and meatballs weren't my favorite, which is why I'm giving them a 4 out of 10. Finally, we have the 15-ounce Great Value brand pasta rings and meatballs in tomato sauce that cost 98 cents. That received 4.1 stars out of 5 out of 468 ratings. Here's the list of ingredients, and I'm happy to say once again, there's no TVP in the meatballs, just beef and pork. The whole can has 390 calories, 14 grams of total fat, 5 grams of saturated fat, no trans fat, 35 milligrams of cholesterol, 1,050 milligrams of sodium, 48 grams of carbohydrates, 4 grams of fiber, 15 grams of sugars, and 17 grams of protein. Now let's get our Great Value brand pasta rings and meatballs and tomato sauce out of the can, into the bowl, and then heat it up. After heating it in the microwave on high for 2.5 minutes, our Great Value brand spaghetti and meatballs are ready. And out of all 3 cans, these look the least appetizing out of all 3. So into the old pie hole, and down the gullet they went. Now these surprised me just a little bit. The tomato sauce was pretty tasty. It wasn't as sweet as the Campbell's, but it was sweeter than the Chef Boyardee. And just to make this clear, when I say sweet, I'm not talking about overly candy sweet, but it has enough sugar to tone down the acid in the tomato sauce, which is nice and something I do when I make my own tomato sauce at home. And the meatballs weren't great. They weren't nearly as good as the Campbell's, but they were better than the Chef Boyardee's. And the spaghetti rings were cooked perfect, just like the Campbell's. So the Great Value spaghetti rings are right in the middle between the Chef Boyardee and the Campbell's, which is why I'm giving the Great Value spaghetti rings and meatballs a 6 out of 10. Thank you all very much for watching. Please don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with your family and friends. And I'll see you soon.